We are going to be looking at the digestive system in this unit. The digestive system is our body system that includes all of the organs of the body that help us break down food and absorb those food molecules into our bloodstream so they can be delivered throughout our body. Here are some key terms to know when it comes to the digestive system. When we talk about the digestive system, we already defined what it is. It's all of the organs in the body that break down food. And digestion is the process of breaking down those food molecules. And that's a little bit different than absorption, which is going to be actually absorbing the molecules once they're broken down into very, very small pieces and putting them into the bloodstream. The medical specialty that deals with any problems in this section called the GI tract is called gastroenterology. And the specialty that deals with disorders of the rectum and the anus is proctology. You've probably heard someone refer to the digestive system as the GI tract. And the GI tract stands for gastrointestinal tract. This first part, gastro, means stomach, and intestinal, exactly what it sounds like, means intestine. And as with many things in the science world, the gastrointestinal tract is also known as the alimentary canal. Basically, what that's referencing is the entire tube that carries food from our mouth to our anus is called the GI tract. And this spot right here references all of the things that you will pass by from mouth to anus as you go, as food changes from being food into chyme and into the various things that it's going to be absorbed in, and then eventually feces. So we know about our mouth. The pharynx is a fancy word for your throat. The esophagus is the tube that swallows food and takes it from your mouth to your stomach. From there you digest food in the stomach. And then we hit the small intestines in this order. The duodenum, you can also pronounce it duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Then from there, we're going to hit the large intestines in this order. The cecum, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and then the rectum. And then that's kind of our holding tank for feces. And when we are eventually going to expel our feces, it's going to come out the anus. Now, the digestive system is composed of all of these organs, but it's also composed of what we call accessory structures. And the accessory structures are any structures that the food is not going to directly pass through, but are going to have a role in helping to digest or absorb the food. For example, teeth don't actually absorb food, but they help us break down our food and chew it up during mastication. Same thing with our tongue. Our tongue doesn't actually absorb food molecules, but it helps move the food around our mouth so that we can properly chew it. And even the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas are a part of the digestive system, but they contribute products to digestion rather than the food actually passing through the liver or passing through the gallbladder or the pancreas on its way to the intestines. So again, the difference between an accessory structure and an organ of the digestive system is that the accessory structure, the food doesn't pass directly through that. And I know that's a little bit deceiving when we think of our teeth and our tongue because they're in our oral cavity, but the food does not actually pass through the lumen of a tooth or the lumen of a tongue. So when it comes to the function of the digestive system, it's not just about digesting food and making it smaller. It all starts with ingesting, which means taking food into the body and liquids into the body. Secretion is a step that is really occurring in pretty much every phase of the digestive process. And that's various types of cells that are releasing various types of products, including water, acid, chemical buffers, and enzymes, all into the lumen of the GI tract as a way of helping that food either be digested and broken down or to help it be absorbed. Mixing and propulsion is something we don't think about either, but the muscles in the digestive tract have to mix the food up and churn it up and get it as exposed to the enzymes and acids that are in there as possible so that it gets digested very well, and then also to push it forward. It really wouldn't do us much good if our food just stayed sitting in our stomach. Digestion, as we mentioned before, is actually breaking the food down into smaller pieces, but it's absorption that actually takes those very, very tiny molecules and passes them through the wall of the GI tract and into the bloodstream. And from there, that's where we are able to deliver those nutrients to the entire rest of the body that needs it. Remember, our brain needs 20% of our oxygen and glucose at any given point in time. So it's very important that our foods not only be digested, but also absorbed. And then, of course, defecation, which is the process of removing indigestible food. It's the fancy word for pooping. But it's got to be done because we need to get rid of the waste products. And that material that we excrete during this process is called feces. So all of these are functions of the digestive system. Now, when it comes to digestion, there's actually two different types. One type is called mechanical digestion. And mechanical digestion is anything that the body is doing that is going to physically cut or tear or rip the food or move it along in the process of digestion. So the obvious place, of course, is the teeth where this occurs. We're going to rip our food, we're going to chew it up and get it as small as possible. But even besides that, when it gets into our stomach, we can't really feel it very well, but our stomach walls are going to kind of be churning that food around and kind of mixing it up. The second type of digestion is called chemical digestion. And this is what's going on kind of behind the scenes once we've eaten our food by various chemicals, enzymes, and acids that are going to really do the job of breaking down the food materials into absorbable molecules. This is a really critical step because really it doesn't matter how long you chew something. It's never going to be small enough to be absorbed into a cell if it hasn't been further broken down chemically. So you can chew on a piece of bread all day long to your heart's content, but it's not going to be small enough without the enzymes, without the help of enzymes to get it actually pass through the cells and into the bloodstream and then deliver to the cells that need to use it for energy. And if you remember from baby biology, enzymes are biological catalysts. That's the fancy word that we use. Biological catalysts. And a catalyst is something that is going to speed up chemical reactions. So enzymes are critical to allowing us to get the energy from our food in a timely manner. If we didn't have them, it would take days to digest and absorb even just a single piece of bread. Yet we can eat multiple meals a day because of these little special chemical helpers. Like many things in the body, the GI tract is composed of many layers of different cell structures and tissues. And from the esophagus to the anal canal, it's 4-layer arrangement from inside out, which we can think of as lumen outward, goes like this. The mucosal layer, the submucosal, which is really more out than under. I know sub we relate to as under. The muscularis and the serosa. So when I talk about the lumen out or inside out, what we're really talking about here is this portion right here. We call that the lumen, and that's the, if you kind of think of your GI tract as a tube, which it really is, it's coiled up in certain places, but it's an opening in the middle. That's where the food is passing through. And when we're talking about this layering system, we're talking about going from this inside layer out. Okay, so that's what we mean with that 4-layer arrangement there. So let's take a closer look at the mucosal layer, which is the innermost layer of the GI tract. This is the one that lines the lumen. So it's the first layer that the foodstuffs is going to be exposed to when we swallow food or when we have it in our GI tract. The mucosa is kind of one of the most interesting layers of the GI tract because they have specialized cells in different areas based on the job that it's going to be doing. All mucosa is considered epithelial tissue, and it has some connective tissue. CT stands for connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is covering and lining tissue. And there's also a very thin, smooth muscle layer that's associated with it, but that doesn't have a lot to do with the actual functionality of it. So within the mucosa, there's usually going to be some lymph tissue in there as well. And our lymph tissue is there to help us fight any pathogens. When we are eating food, we are exposing our body to pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungi that we will accidentally ingest with food, even in the cleanest of kitchens and environments. And that lymph tissue is really important to help kind of protect us. So as far as the epithelium goes, there's several different types. In the mouth, esophagus, and anus is a type called stratified squamous epithelial tissue. And this is very, stratified means a lot of layers. And that's because in these areas, we are looking at a lot of friction. On the inside of the mouth, as we chew food and bite food and move it around our mouths, we're going to be knocking cells off of there like crazy. So it's great because we have all of these extra layers of cells in waiting, so to speak, because we're going to swallow actually some of our own cells when we swallow food. Same thing with the esophagus. The food is going to, which we call a bolus when we swallow it, the food is going to go down the esophagus and kind of scrape those cells off of that area. And then the anus as well, as we pass feces through it. It just has to have a tough lining and be okay to shed a few of those cells. So in the rest of the digestive tract, we're looking at a type called simple columnar epithelium. And this epithelium is specialized for the absorption that we're going to need in the digestive tract. So our squamous cells have a shape kind of like an eye, with our nucleus in the middle there. And our columnar cells are actually kind of columnar shaped, and they usually have some kind of stuff on the top of them, and we'll talk about those later, that kind of makes them look like they've got a hairy lining there. But the simple columnar epithelium is really important in that absorptive process, and because these cells often secrete enzymes that are going to contribute to digestion. Additionally, there's a special cell called a goblet cell that's embedded in these columnar cells that secretes mucus, and we'll talk about the importance of that later. Finally, we have a layer called the muscularis mucosa. So it's a layer of muscle that's actually associated with the mucosa, and it's very, very thin, smooth muscle, which means that it's not under our voluntary control. And what's really cool about the muscularis mucosa is that it causes regions of the digestive tract to fold. And that's really important because one of the big things we're going to hit in the digestive system, a big concept, is called surface area. And we will be talking about that a lot, but this layer allows the inner portion of the digestive tract to kind of fold a little bit like this and really increase the surface area of that area of the GI tract. As we continue lumen outward, we started with the mucosa, and then beyond that is the submucosa, which we can think of as underneath the submucosa. But really it's more accurate to think of it as being outside of the submucosa. And this is a layer of loose connective tissue that binds to that muscularis layer. And it has a lot of important things like blood vessels, glands, and lymph tissue. It also contains the neurons that are part of what we call the enteric nervous system, which the brain of the gut we learned about in the nervous system is kind of like its own entity, and it can think and kind of do almost independently of the brain itself. So the function of this, because it's got all of this stuff going on, is to allow the smooth muscle to contract as needed. And then it also is where the blood and lymph vessels are located so that we can actually absorb those food molecules and get them into the bloodstream. Moving one more layer out, we hit the muscularis layer, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is muscle. Now, there are two types of muscle that's involved in the GI tract. Skeletal muscle is what we're familiar with voluntary control. And this is where we have the opportunity to actually control a portion of our digestion. This is really just going to occur for us in the mouth, where we voluntarily ingest food and chew it around, and then we have a little bit of control over swallowing. Once we hit the spot in the back of our throat, it starts to become reflexive, but we somewhat control that. And as long as we're not suffering from any weird ailment, we can control when we defecate as well. These areas are controlled by, again, skeletal muscle, which means that we have control over it. Much of the GI tract, though, is smooth muscle. And smooth muscle is involuntary in nature. So there's two different types of directions of the fibers. Circular, which exactly what they sound like they do. They go around the organ in a circular fashion, and longitudinal, which go in a long direction. And this is the part that the food is being mixed and crushed and being moved forward that we actually can't really even feel happen. Once we swallow our food, it's kind of up to the GI tract to take care of the rest. We don't have to think about the food going down, 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 down once we swallow it. And then once it gets to our stomach, we don't have to think, okay, contract, 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 and so forth. This is all under voluntary control. It's all happening. And the term for moving this food forward is called peristalsis. So propelling the food from one place to another is called peristalsis. And finally, our outermost layer of the GI tract is the serosa. And the serosa is simple squamous epithelial tissue with a little bit of connective tissue. And this is, we've actually already heard this term called peritoneum when we're in the abdominal cavity. And it's really there to prevent friction because all of our organs are really close to each other. There's not space in the body, and we really don't want those organs to rub against each other at all. So the serosal layer has a section that secretes a little bit of fluid into a small cavity that allows those organs to be sitting next to each other and kind of slide past each other rather than rub up against each other and essentially cause friction and burst open. This is a diagram of the peritoneum. The visceral layer is the one that's directly on the organ wall. The cavity is the space that contains the fluid, and the parietal layer lines the walls of the cavity.